It was a quiet night off the coast of Australia. Two powerful warships, HMAS Melbourne and HMAS Voyager, were training together in the dark ocean waters. Everything seemed under control, until one wrong turn changed everything forever. In just seconds, steel crushed steel. A massive aircraft carrier sliced a destroyer in half. Dozens of sailors were trapped below deck. Many never made it out. But what really caused this shocking disaster? Why did a modern navy with trained crews fail to stop the collision? And why did it take 2 royal commissions to uncover the full truth? This is the story of the HMAS Voyager disaster, the night the Royal Australian Navy was shaken to its core. Before we talk about the disaster, let's first talk about the ship at the center of it all, HMAS Melbourne. She was a light aircraft carrier and one of the most powerful ships in the Royal Australian Navy. But her journey didn't start in Australia. Originally built for the British Royal Navy during World War II, she was known as HMS Majestic. But the war ended before she was finished, and work on the ship was paused. In 1947, Australia bought the unfinished vessel and began turning her into a modern warship. She was upgraded with a new angled flight deck, steam catapult launch system, and advanced radar, cutting-edge technology for that time. By 1955, she was ready. The ship was commissioned as HMAS Melbourne, able to carry over 20 aircraft and a crew of more than 1,300. Now that we've talked about HMAS Melbourne, let's take a moment to understand the second ship involved in this tragedy, HMAS Voyager. Voyager was a daring-class destroyer built right here in Australia. Construction began in 1949, and she officially joined the Royal Australian Navy in 1957. She wasn't just any destroyer. Voyager was the first all-welded ship ever built in Australia, marking a major step forward in local naval engineering. Fast, powerful, and modern for her time, Voyager was often deployed to the Far East Strategic Reserve. She completed 6 major missions overseas, but like Melbourne, she never saw actual combat. Her role was mostly support, presence, and training. February 9th, 1964, both HMAS Melbourne and HMAS Voyager arrive at Jervis Bay, preparing for post-refit trials. The next day, February 10th, starts off unremarkably. Both ships operate independently, even conducting exercises with the British submarine HMS Tabard. But by evening, 20 nautical miles off the coast, Melbourne begins night flying operations. Voyager is assigned her familiar role, plane guard. Her job, stay 1,500 to 2,000 yards astern and to port of the carrier, ready to respond if any aircraft crashes into the sea. It's a high-stakes job that demands constant precision. Aircraft carriers must change course frequently and sharply to face into the wind, meaning destroyers like Voyager must stay alert, responsive, and perfectly positioned. At first, everything goes smoothly. Voyager holds her place effortlessly. But at 8:40 p.m., course changes begin to align the ships for a new flight pattern. This maneuver is meant to put them on a heading of 020 degrees, straight north. Instead, Voyager finds herself ahead and to starboard of Melbourne, not where she's supposed to be. At 8:52 p.m., Melbourne's bridge sends an order, Foxtrot Corpin 020, instructing Voyager to return to her plane guard station. Voyager acknowledges the signal. A minute later, she begins to turn, first to starboard, away from Melbourne. Then, unexpectedly, she turns to port. From Melbourne, this looks like a fishtail maneuver, a typical zigzag pattern to reduce speed before slipping in behind. But this time, Voyager doesn't zig again. She holds her course, and that course is directly into Melbourne's path. Inside Melbourne's bridge, the officers stay focused, interpreting Voyager's move as another standard zigzag. But when the destroyer fails to correct her course, something feels wrong. Decades later, questions would be raised. Was Voyager's bridge distracted? Justice Spicer's 1964 report claimed that the officer of the watch and the navigator had lost focus, and that Captain Stevens was reading charts, impairing his night vision. But survivors from Voyager's bridge told a different story. 3 men who were there gave direct testimony. There was no distraction. The officer of the watch was at his station, binoculars fixed on Melbourne the entire time. Captain Stevens had left the chart area by 8:54 p.m. He was near his chair, watching. At 8:55 p.m., as Voyager turned port and brought Melbourne back into view, the port bridge lookout raised the alarm. On Melbourne, the navigation officer ordered half speed astern. Captain Robertson immediately followed with a command for full astern. On Voyager, Captain Stevens reacted just seconds later. Full ahead, both engines, hard a starboard. He then instructed his quartermaster to announce collision imminent, but it was too late. At 54 seconds from impact, the two warships were just 600 meters apart. Both were locked in, too close, too fast, too committed to their courses. Captain Robertson believed Voyager was performing a legitimate fishtail. He insisted the danger came suddenly, and by then, it was irreversible. Voyager's port light was not seen until 20 seconds before the collision, and by then, all either ship could do was brace for impact. 8:56 p.m., HMAS. Melbourne's bow slices into Voyager. The collision is devastating. The impact lands just aft of Voyager's bridge and operations room. The forward superstructure is torn apart. All senior officers on the bridge are killed instantly. The sheer mass of Melbourne rolls Voyager to starboard, then splits her in two. Voyager's bow is pulled down Melbourne's port side, her stern down the starboard. Then, silence, broken only by the hiss of ruptured metal and the roar of the sea. An explosion in Voyager's forward boiler briefly ignites a fire on Melbourne's bow, but seawater quickly snuffs it out. 10 minutes later, Voyager's forward half disappears beneath the waves, dragged down by her twin 4.5-inch gun turrets. The aft section remains afloat, for now, but at 12:18 a.m., it too is gone. In the dark chaos, Melbourne launches rescue boats immediately. Her wardroom and hangar are transformed into triage zones. One cutter, commanded by leading seaman M.A.W. Risley, rescues 40 men, pushing the boat to its limits. But the Admiral's barge is badly damaged by debris. 8 helicopters take off, but crowding in the air becomes a danger itself. Only 2 are allowed to operate at a time. Many survivors in the water are unable, or too shaken, to use the winches. So the helicopters light the night with their searchlights instead. By 9:58 p.m., more help is on the way. 5 minesweepers, 2 SAR boats from HMAS Creswell, helicopters from Naval Air Station Nowra, and the destroyer HMAS Stewart. Air Nymph recovers 34 survivors, but is damaged while trying to transfer them to Melbourne. Air Sprite collects 36 more and brings them to shore. Search efforts continue for days, until February 14th. On board Voyager were 314 souls. In the aftermath of the collision, 82 lives were lost, 14 officers, 67 sailors, and 1 civilian. Among them, Captain Stevens, and nearly the entire bridge crew. Most were off duty, resting in the forward part of the ship when the collision happened. Only 3 bodies were ever recovered. Captain Stevens was one of them. They were buried on February 14th. The rest declared dead on the 17th. Across Australia, memorial services were held on February 21st. There were no casualties on Melbourne. But for both ships, and for a nation in mourning, the scars would last forever. Before any internal investigation could even begin, one thing was already clear. The public didn't trust the Royal Australian Navy to investigate itself. Although the Navy's senior officers recommended a board of inquiry, recent history had left the public doubtful. A series of naval mishaps throughout the 1950s and early 1960s had damaged the Navy's credibility. Many feared that if the investigation stayed within the Navy, the truth might never come out. Prime Minister Sir Robert Menzies responded quickly. He declared that only an inquiry led by a federal judge would be accepted. Anything else, in his words, would be seen as a cover-up. There had been plans since 1950, following an explosion aboard HMAS Terracon, to allow for this kind of externally supervised inquiry. But the necessary regulations were never finalized. With no other option left, Menzies announced a royal commission. The Royal Commission was formally established on the 13th of February, 1964, led by former Attorney General Sir John Spicer. Its purpose was clear: uncover the causes of the collision and determine the events that led up to it. A few secondary questions were also included, like whether the ships were suitable for the exercise and how survivors were rescued and treated. But these instructions were made without consulting the Navy itself. From the beginning, the investigation was weighed down by conflicting opinions, gaps in information, and political pressure. It took months of hearings, statements, and deliberations before the inquiry was finally closed on 25 June. The Spicer report was publicly released on 26 August 1964. But the report raised more questions than answers. Its narrative felt disconnected, the logic unclear, and it often failed to reference the actual evidence presented during the hearings. The 3 surviving members of Voyager's bridge crew gave statements. They told a different story, one where Voyager's officers had not lost track of the Melbourne. Yet Spicer's final conclusion claimed that Voyager's bridge crew had lost situational awareness and failed to maintain an effective lookout. He placed the bulk of the blame on them, but, curiously, blamed no individual officers by name. One piece of direct evidence from Voyager's tactical officer showed that the officer of the watch had indeed been monitoring Melbourne up to the moment of collision. But this testimony was dismissed, not because it lacked merit, but because the council assisting the commissioner rejected it, and the government had done the same ever since. As for Melbourne's role in the disaster, Spicer did not spare criticism. He pointed out failures by Captain Robertson and 2 of his bridge officers. They had failed to alert Voyager to the danger and hadn't taken steps to avoid the collision. But deeper problems emerged in the years to follow. Subsequent reviews of the evidence suggest that Spicer deliberately altered Melbourne's logbook times by 2 minutes. This made it appear that the crew had simply watched as Voyager turned into their path, doing nothing to prevent the crash. Captain Robertson insisted Voyager's turn was sudden and left no room for action. But the version of history that entered the record was Spicer's, not the testimony of the men who were actually there. In the aftermath, Captain Robertson was reassigned to HMAS Watson, a training post in Sydney. It felt like a punishment. 2 days later, he submitted his resignation. The public saw it for what it was, a respected naval officer being quietly pushed aside. To many in the Parliament and the general public, the message was obvious. Captain Robertson had been made a scapegoat, and the investigation, despite all its formality and public show, had failed to answer the most important question: why did 2 Australian warships in peacetime collide with such tragic consequences? But the story didn't end with the first Royal Commission. Over the next few years, the silence surrounding the Voyager disaster began to crack. Pressure mounted, slowly, then relentlessly. The public questioned the narrative. Politicians from both sides of the aisle demanded answers, and the media kept digging. But the final blow came from someone who had once stood on Voyager's bridge. Lieutenant Commander Peter Cabin, the ship's former executive officer, came forward with disturbing claims. He alleged that Captain Stevens had a habit of drinking to excess, that he was, in truth, unfit for command. Long before the night Voyager sailed into the side of Melbourne, the public uproar could no longer be ignored. On the 18th of May, 1967, Prime Minister Harold Holt made a historic announcement. A second Royal Commission would be held, something never before done in Australian history for a single incident. But this time, the investigation would not focus on how the ships collided. It would focus on who was in command, and whether he should have been there at all. The commission, led by Sir Stanley Burbury, Justice Kenneth Asprey, and Justice Geoffrey Lucas, opened on the 13th of June. Formal hearings began 5 weeks later, on the 18th of July. This second inquiry delved into Stevens's health and habits. It was revealed that he suffered from a duodenal ulcer, so severe it had once hospitalized him. But most concerning of all, he had concealed the recurrence of the condition from Navy Command. And on the very night of the disaster, witnesses testified that he had been served a triple brandy. A post-mortem later confirmed a blood alcohol level of 0.025%. But the significance of that reading was hotly contested by medical experts throughout the proceedings. The hearings lasted 85 days, when the final report, now known as the Burberry Report, was released to the public on 25 February 1968. Its findings were sobering. The commission concluded that Captain Stevens was medically unfit for command. His ulcer had impaired his judgment. Yet they also determined that alcohol was not a contributing factor at the time of the collision. These revelations cast doubt on the conclusions of the First Royal Commission, particularly those that assumed Voyager was under sound command. The officers of HMAS Melbourne, including Rear Admiral Robertson, were cleared of wrongdoing, but the damage had already been done. For decades after, both crews continued to carry the weight of shared blame. Media headlines and public memory repeated the flawed conclusions of the first inquiry long after the truth had been laid bare. The tragedy of the Melbourne Voyager collision left 82 lives lost and many questions that still echo through history. 2 royal commissions, conflicting findings, and decades of debate have kept this disaster in the national memory. But even after all these years, one thing remains painfully clear. The truth can be complex, and sometimes justice isn't as straightforward as we wish it to be. Was this tragedy the result of one man's failing health, a failure in leadership, or a system too rigid to question itself? What do you think really happened that night? Was the final verdict fair to both crews? Do you believe the truth has fully come out?